Hi, can you hear? Can you hear me? Okay, yes. Hi, my name is Serena Hijas, and this is Lim Chun Wee. We're both from Hijas Kasturi to present to you the Expo Pavilion. As you know, the Expo only happens every couple of years, and it was a competition that we entered for Malaysia. And it was quite a departure in terms of the concept approach that we wanted to take for the pavilion. I think traditionally Malaysia has always presented itself in terms of a vernacular pavilion in the Expo, and we wanted to detract from that but take something of a value and represent Malaysia's value at the pavilion itself. So what we wanted to present, and we'll come to the theme of the pavilion, was that of course you know that Malaysia is a tropical climate, and we are running on the location where the rainforests are. We are home to over half the species of plants and animals in the world, and I'd like to say that in Malaysia we are quite lucky. It's a country of abundance. It's a country of abundance of water, resources, nature, and all the rest of it, but we don't have the appreciation of the abundance that we had or have. And I think we wanted to reflect that in the pavilion that we designed. So whilst the theme was feeding the planet, energy for life, we wanted to convey the message that the rainforest is really feeding the planet and energy for life in many different ways. It may not be the rice bowl, but it's where the herbs, spices come from, it's where medicine comes from, and it's where our oxygen comes from. So it is feeding the planet, and that's why we took that sort of theme. So at the Expo site, we were allocated the site, which was a very long, longitudinal site. And on this site, or the pavilion, which most countries get, we created the concept of a unique homage to the Malaysian pavilion, to the humble rainforest. So there's the seeds as an inspiration. So we created these series of seeds from the rainforest. That was our inspiration for the form, symbolizing the value as well-being. The design of Malaysian Pavilion also wanted to emphasize that more than advancement of sustainable food practice, but at the same time, just a celebration of our natural resources. And in terms of building and constructing the pavilion, we wanted to convey the message of sustainability not only to the world, but actually more importantly to Malaysians. And so never before in Malaysia have we explored the material of blue lamp. And in fact, this project is probably the second project only in Malaysia to look at using the material of blue lamp. And one of the reasons for using this material was the idea that we could prefabricate it, that we would obviously get timber from natural resources that are sustainable, but also that we'd be able to pack it and bring it home. Because there's a lot of wastage when it comes to building at the Expo, and we wanted to break that cycle of wastage by the concept of actually bringing it back home to Malaysia once the Expo finishes, which it did on the 31st of October. The concept of the 4 seeds showing the life cycle of seeds expressed. The first seed is to communicate about Malaysia's diversity. The second is an homage to the main food base in Malaysia, which is the rice bowl seed. The next is to heal and protect the rainforest and what comes from the rainforest, importance in terms of the herbal pharmaceuticals that comes from that. And then lastly, something to inspire the culture and therefore the cultural expression in our food and in our diversity. So in terms of the massing, we created this series of seeds that interlocked into one another, especially seed 2 and 3. And so the experience is that you step into it and then step out into it. And in fact, this Malaysian pavilion is probably one of the most popular pavilions that the Malaysians have actually ever had. Back in May or in June, after only 2 months of opening, they had almost 1 million people come through this pavilion itself. So for us it was a great tribute because we didn't want to be known as that vernacular building at the end of the street. but that expresses a sort of contemporariness and values. In terms of the outer layer, of course, is the laminated timber. In the inner layer, we've actually put a sort of canvas material inside, and then inside the experience also we've used a lot of sustainable materials from bamboo and rice husks to create actually the floors in the building. This is a Malaysian pavilion, so it looks larger than life when you look at the sort of drawings. When you come up to it, it looks actually quite small, but when you go inside it, it actually feels larger than what it is. So this is the experience and sequential experience. In seed 1 basically was the diversity experience, and it's a single layer pavilion. As you step out of it, the 2 and 3 are interlocking, so you come through a rainforest that's recreated inside the seed and takes you up through, and then you exit out of this pavilion. So the components of the sustainability were obviously the glue lamp construction that we created for the pavilion itself. And this just to show you the amount of CO2 reduction by sort of picking glue lamp and sustainable timber as a structure. There were about 50,000 pieces of nuts and bolts and screws and 3,000 pieces of steel joints, all that were pre-assembled in Malaysia first, and then packed up and then brought across to Milan and then reassembled in Milan. So that's just showing the construction of the shell of the glue lamp. Remembering that this is the first time that Malaysian contractors are actually experiencing building in glue lamp. Although we build in timber, not many of us know how to build with glue lamp. And there was a lot of teething issues in building with glue lamp, especially in terms of climatic thermal expansions between building in a tropical environment and bringing somewhere like Milan, which is non-tropical environment. So that's the other construction, and that will be also the deconstruction of the timber. So that's just showing you all the components that made up the building. We also just studied some of the thermal performance of the glue lamp, obviously. And then these were the earlier studies about how much, whether we would get more daylight in space. Of course, once we came to the construction, they actually took out some of the elements of the pavilion for the cost reasons. But we do still harvest the rainwater for the consumption of the pavilion itself. And then just walking through the experience of the pavilion inside. Walking through the biodiversity. And then upstairs is just an exhibition of food and sustainable foods. We didn't do the interiors. And then the last being the live performance space. Thank you.
That last space where it's open to the outside, is that actually open air? Open the previous one? So
yes, totally open.
It's open. I think sorry. The fact that the interiors are entirely screened, was that an exhibition choice, or did you want?
That's for exhibition.
That's for the exhibition.
Yes, to create a black box experience until you get to the end, which becomes a white box experience. Well, semi-white box. It's only open on the sides, obviously. Yeah, it's non-air conditioned, purely on airflow.
What is the material used to clad, to enclose the spaces? Because you talk about the timber.
Teflon.
It's Teflon.
Yes.
Did you think about skinning the outside of the buildings at all? Because it's a very evocative triangular form, which I'm not sure necessarily relates to seeds in my mind. I think the actual oval form
relates to seeds, and I can see the rice husk and the things we're talking about. But suddenly, when it transforms into this geodesic dome type structure, it suddenly, for me, it takes it away from the seed. And I wondered if you thought about skinning the whole envelope.
Actually, the first one was supposed to be skinned, and then it was supposed to go from being skinned to slowly opening up. And the structure went through quite a lot of engineering. In fact, the geometry of it wasn't as conforming, if you like, as it was, but it went to sort of design build, and we had to basically be judicious in terms of components and time. We were the first to be there. We had a very limited time to actually construct, and I don't know if you've built in Milan, but just getting through customs with the material and getting onto site was quite difficult. So in the end of the day, because of the time constraint, we went to a geometry that was a bit simpler, if you like. The geometry was not as simple structurally as that. Yeah.
But the structure was actually simplified.
Okay. Closer.
Right. Closer. The structure was simplified into this triangulator because we wanted actually to be trapezoid in shape, but we couldn't achieve that in the time that was given, and also the budget. However, the section of the ellipse was followed, so the form was not compromised in that sense.
Okay. And the area underneath, so even these stands and everything, this is what, concrete? So it's something set in place? So
This one for the external is concrete, yes.
no, but even for the internal, you had a section that you had like the skin, okay?
Where you show the water, the section,
that.
where you show the rain harvesting.
Oh, okay, earlier. No, the floors are supposed to be made out of rice husk, compressed rice husk, decks.
No, because you were talking about the possibility of taking the pavilion to Malaysia.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes.
But all that part that is what is connecting the soil, and even this kind of
All the base.
basement, this I imagine
In concrete.
It's concrete.
Yes.
And that will remain there.
That will
so
remain.
Or will be
Well, that
destroyed?
will be.
And is it really going to come back?
Well, actually, Land Lease is interested to bring it back, but the advice is it's quite expensive to bring it back. Yeah. So even though it was made into the components to bring it back, actually they're just looking at it at the moment.
So last night at Pachaccha Night, which we organised last evening, Paul Finch ran through 20 pavilions, his favourite pavilions, and this was one of them that came up. They didn't show the British Pavilion, but anyway, I'm not going to go
Oh,
into
that
that.
was nice. The British Pavilion was nice. I mean,
But I think it is a very specific building type, building in an expo environment, and whether it's dare I say architecture, I'm not quite sure because everybody is competing in a very close proximity. But I thought after seeing the pavilions last night, this came through quite strongly. Whether it said Malaysia or not, I think that the use of timber is very nice, and I think that's what we all relate to with these tropical areas. So I think you've done a great job.
I think it was a change of mindset. We haven't changed all the mindset with the Malaysian trade industry because she still put pot plants and pretty pictures downstairs.
And I think that is a shame with all these pavilions. I think that if you're the architect, you should be involved with the interior too. I think it's a real key element to make it. Not typically, I know, but...
Actually, we went in as the competition and we did the design build competition as well as a second stage. But it's the exhibition guys that threw us out and not the client because they wanted to build it cheaper and not say where and how it's done. So... are they here?
But
I may not get the job next year.
But I think we all, as architects, always have this problem. So I don't really take a schedule or budget as an excuse because this is something that is common in all of our work. But anyway,
I have another question. At the end, you are competing with other pavilions to attract people. You know? So in one way, it's a display. You are kind of the national team. You know? At that moment, and you are competing. This is a kind of a competition. How did you approach that? You have a statement saying, "I want to be bigger or more impressive than my competitors," or "I want to take a more subtle position, so in all this noise that is an expo, I want to take another more conservative and more, a more quiet position." You have any?
Whether we were trying to compete with, we were trying to compete to change the mindset of the Malaysian trade industry.
So you were not focusing on, we could say, not on the competition, but because it's not really a competition, but how you were not thinking of what would be the other pavilions doing?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Or even towards the expo, what position you will take? Like for instance, I think it was Bahrain. Bahrain, it was a more subtle pavilion, more really that from outside very the presence is very subtle, no?
Yes.
And then you had to experience the pavilion to discover, no, everything. While here it was the opposite, no?
Correct.
Visually, formally, even it was more a statement by itself, no? So
maybe it's because it's the type of architecture we do. We kind of do make some statements if we look at some of our works. Yeah, but we were competing with us within ourselves rather than, we don't know what other pavilions are going. We know there can be subtle games. I mean, the only other expo I've ever been to was back in Spain so many years, 20 years ago.
Thank you very much.